Hi, it's Katrina. My friend David is going to be helping me out with the voiceover today, so everyone give him a warm welcome.
Number 10. The Crucifixion Gap. In this day and age, the crucifix is more or less the central image of Christianity. The crucifix includes the body of Jesus Christ, unlike the cross. The cross itself is a hot fashion item these days, although you don't see many people wearing a cross with Jesus attached to it around their necks. But what you might not know is that the cross wasn't always the main symbol of Christianity. The cross didn't become widespread until the 4th century AD, thanks to Emperor Constantine. Biblical scholars have been trying to understand why it took hundreds of years for art to start depicting Jesus on the cross. 400 years to be exact went by before the image caught on. The best guess we have is that being crucified was embarrassing. In ancient Rome, crucifixion was a punishment reserved for non-citizens. Slaves, poor people, criminals, and foreigners were the only ones being crucified. Scholars think early followers of Christianity were embarrassed that Jesus suffered the death of a lowly criminal. There's even a piece of graffiti on a wall in Rome called the Alexamenos graffito, which shows Jesus on the cross with the head of a donkey. This was to mock worshippers of Jesus for revering the man who died in the same way as poor people. And now for number 9. But first I wanted to give a shout out to Chuck Wolfam for the super thanks. We really appreciate your support. If you're new here, be sure to subscribe to the channel. Number 9. The Crown of Thorns. In 2019, when the spire of Notre Dame collapsed and fire ravaged the ancient Parisian cathedral, there was a real fear that the priceless treasures locked inside would be destroyed. But the next morning, the 850-year-old structure still stood, and the holy relics inside were fine. The vaults were damaged, but the most important artifacts remained unscathed. And one of these artifacts is the most legendary relic in all of Christianity: the crown of thorns placed upon the head of Jesus Christ during the crucifixion. The crown of thorns is preserved inside a crystalline reliquary. It's basically held inside a clear tubing so that it doesn't decay or get damaged. Only once a year does the relic come out to see the public on Good Friday. But where did the crown come from, and how do we know it was the one put on Jesus' head? The Gospels tell us what the cruel instrument was used for, but there's no mention of what happened to it after. It wasn't until 591 AD that Gregory of Tours wrote a description of the crown. He wrote that every day the leaves wither and every day they grow green again, because of the divine power within the crown. The relic, wherever it came from, was kept safe at the Basilica of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. But then, when Jerusalem was seized by the Muslims in 636 AD, it vanished. No historical records mention it again until 950 AD, when the crown appeared in Constantinople. The big mystery is that scientists don't know if the artifact in Paris is the original crown of thorns or if it's a fake. Number 8. The origins of the Philistines. Human remains discovered at a cemetery in southern Israel are helping to solve the mystery of the Philistines. In the Bible, the Philistines were the arch-enemies of the Israelites. And as we all know from the Bible, the Israelites were the chosen people of God. This meant the Philistines were the arch-enemies of God. David was an Israelite who fought against a Philistine giant named Goliath, and the biblical hero Samson was revered for slaying over 1,000 Philistine warriors using nothing but a donkey's jawbone. The mystery has always been that scientists aren't sure where they came from. It's believed they likely migrated across the Near East at the end of the Bronze Age around 1200 BC. They lived in a series of cities along the southern coast of Israel and the Gaza Strip, and they constantly waged war with the Israelites. The human remains found in the cemetery came with DNA. Researchers were able to connect the genetic material to populations from southern Europe. Researchers from Germany's Max Planck Institute published their results in the Science Advances Research Journal. The Bible claims the Philistines originated from a distant island, and the DNA points to somewhere around the Aegean Sea, which is loaded with islands. It could be that the Bible was right. In fact, the DNA analysis shows the Philistines may have been the legendary sea people who showed up out of nowhere and collapsed the Bronze Age civilization in 1177 BC. These may have even been the people who disrupted ancient Egypt and helped destroy the early Greek city-states. Number 7. The Dendera Zodiac. When Napoleon Bonaparte sent his armies into Egypt in 1799, he brought scientists and artists with him too, so they could help study ancient Egyptian society. One of the most amazing things his researchers found was a circular zodiac carved into the ceiling at the temple of Hathor in Dendera. It's called the Dendera Zodiac, and its origins are steeped in mystery. The Dendera Zodiac is the only circular astronomical depiction that's been found anywhere in ancient Egypt. Every other zodiac is square or pyramid-shaped. It depicts 360 days, a full calendar year, and has the 12 signs of the zodiac. The 12 signs correspond to the same 12 signs we use today, only they're a little different. Instead of 2 fish for Pisces, there are 2 crocodiles swimming in opposite directions. Khnum the goat has the same characteristics as Capricorn, and Atum the lion deity looks exactly like Leo. And finally, the goddess Isis carrying Horus seems to depict the constellation of Virgo, and it's extremely similar to the image of baby Jesus being carried by the Virgin Mary. There have been a lot of parallels made between Horus and Jesus Christ. Both were said to be born of a virgin, each had 12 disciples and performed miracles, and they were both killed only to rise from the dead and ascend to heaven. What we see in this ancient zodiac is yet another similarity. Horus and his mother Isis were used as the same zodiac sign for Virgo, which today is depicted as Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Do you believe that the stories of Horus and Jesus Christ are in fact the same tale that's been changed slightly over the years in order to gain followers from different generations of people? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and while you're at it, subscribe! Number 6. The Royal Bloodline. There's a theory that says Jesus Christ was married to Mary Magdalene, and together they had a child named Sarah. They also allegedly had a son named Joseph. But the Bible purposely omits any concrete details about the life of Jesus and Mary Magdalene together. However, there are extra biblical texts, ancient Gnostic writings that aren't included in the Bible, which give us more clues. We see in several of these ancient texts, including the Gospel of Mary, the Apocryphon of John, and the Sophia of Jesus Christ, that Jesus was a descendant of King Solomon and King David. He met Mary Magdalene at Capernaum during his ministry, and later they married at Cana. This all makes sense historically because in the 1st century AD, Jewish men were expected to be married, and that included rabbis. Scholars agree Jesus likely started out as a rabbi, and that Christianity didn't really rise until after his death, when people started to venerate him. So, historically speaking, it makes sense that he was married. What we don't know is what happened to Mary Magdalene and the children of Jesus after his crucifixion. It's believed Lazarus smuggled them out of Jerusalem, and they were taken secretly to France, where Mary and her children continued the bloodline. Some say William the Conqueror himself was a direct descendant of Jesus, though there's no evidence to prove this claim. Number 5. The women of the Cathars. The Catholic Church had a superiority complex with women in the Middle Ages. They looked down upon them as inferior beings. Women weren't allowed to have social power unless they were already extremely wealthy, and females were generally seen as a burden on their families. The only way for a woman to have any kind of power was to become a nun. But again, this was normally something reserved for wealthy or socially influential families. That all changed, though, with the emergence of Catharism. Catharism started as an extreme Gnostic movement in southern Europe during the Middle Ages. In the 12th century AD, these people began referring to themselves as the good Christians. The practices of the Cathars varied from region to region, but the main thing about them was that they denied that the Catholic Church had any power or authority over the kingdom of God. They believed God, the good God, was the one from the New Testament, and that the bad God was the one described in the Old Testament. They also thought human spirits were angels trapped in a material body. These beliefs seemed to catch on quick with the people of the ancient world. They believed the church couldn't possibly dictate what was happening on God's earth, and that their interpretations of the Bible were heretic. But the Cathars' greatest sin was allowing women to take high positions within the church. These female priests, called perfecti, were seen as more humbled, more godly, and more holy than any of the church's corrupt bishops. So what happened? Pope Innocent III persuaded local authorities to shut them down. By 1350 AD, the Cathar movement was eradicated. However, academics argue over whether Catharism was ever a real thing or if it was an exaggerated outbreak of women trying to have rights. And before we move on to number 4, I need to thank one of our supporters, Kate Curious. Thanks so much for the super thanks, and if you haven't already, subscribe. Number 4. Jesus the Ghost. Catharism was weird, but Docetism was even weirder. Nobody knows exactly when the movement started, but it was within the first 300 years after Jesus' death and resurrection. The idea behind this bizarre branch of Christology is that Jesus was a ghost, or maybe better described as an illusion. The earliest members of Docetism denied that Jesus was a human being. They claimed Jesus never had a body, but was instead a kind of spectral entity. The idea was that Christ was so holy, he couldn't have possibly taken the human form. Since God doesn't have a human body, how could Jesus? Jesus only appeared in the fleshy suit of a human man, but was more like an ethereal human-shaped glob of ectoplasm. This was what allowed him to perform miracles and to flee the cross after his death. Docetism was unanimously rejected, though, in 325 AD when it was deemed heretical, and many scholars believe Islam, when it rose in the 7th century AD, was partly fueled by Docetism. Number 3. Joan of Arc's ashes. Joan of Arc has been dead for nearly 6 centuries, and in all these years, nobody has ever been able to figure out what exactly became of her remains after she was burned at the stake in 1431 AD. In 1867, a bundle of ashes were discovered in the loft of an apothecary in Paris. The ashes were said to be scooped up from the pyre after Joan of Arc was burned. That's according to the label found with the container. And finally, thanks to modern technology, French scientists were able to study the ashes. They confirmed a piece of the cloth found inside the charred remains could have been part of Joan's gown, since it was dated to the 15th century AD. Scientists then tested DNA on bone and tissue found in the ashes to see if they belonged to a man or a woman. These tests were done in 2006, but they were a huge disaster. Over a dozen scientists, including medical examiners, biochemists, and archaeologists, participated in the study, but the results of the tests were all a huge letdown. The bottle of ashes found in the apothecary contained a mummified cat's leg bone and a random human rib from about 2,600 years ago. So unfortunately, it wasn't Joan of Arc. And we still don't know if a single piece of her body remains somewhere, perhaps sealed in an unmarked vessel. Number 2. The Pope's blood. In 2005, Pope John Paul II died after leading the Catholic Church for 27 years. He also became a saint in 2014. Right before his death, John Paul had a small amount of his blood extracted to be used as the official relic for his veneration. This is an ancient Christian custom in which body parts, blood, or pieces of clothing belonging to saints or popes are worshipped. But it could really be anything: a finger, a piece of snot, a lock of hair, or a shoe a saint wore. Christians don't care what the object is, so long as it has something to do with the saint they wish to pray to. And although anything can be worshipped, blood is definitely at the top of the list. But after Pope John Paul died, someone stole his blood. The golden crystal reliquary containing a few droplets of John Paul's life force was stolen from an Italian cathedral in September 2020. Police did identify the man using surveillance, although we never heard what happened to the guy or what he was planning to do with the blood. Some say Pope blood is sold on the black market to hardcore Satanists who use it in dark rituals. Number 1. The Narcens. Hippolytus of Rome was one of the greatest theologians of the 2nd century AD, but his identity and his true origin has remained largely elusive to historians. One of the most mysterious things about him is that he described a secret group of early Gnostic Christians who called themselves the Narcens. The name was likely derived from the Hebrew word nahas, which means snake. In other words, they called themselves the Snakes. Hippolytus was the only person who wrote about them, though, so we only have his singular account to base everything we know about the mysterious sect. The Narcens supposedly got their teachings from a direct disciple of James the Just. James was Jesus' brother, but it's unclear if this was figuratively or literally, and he was also one of Christ's most important disciples. James the Just was most likely killed around 62 or 69 AD, when the Pharisees had him stoned to death. His disciple Mariam then carried his teachings to the Narcens. If all this is true, they were an entirely different type of religious order who were inspired by Jesus' brother, not Jesus himself. This made their belief system a little weird. They were significantly more mystical than the other religious groups who came in the first years of Christianity. The Narcens believed that Jesus taught how to transcend the physical body through enlightenment. So, in all honesty, he was more of a Buddha than a savior. What are your thoughts on the ancient sects of Christianity? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye guys!